Here in our task list component, let's take our div input group with the metadata picker and all of that. Now let's wrap this into a form tag. And the only thing that we need to do for that is to for sure go ahead, open up a form tag right above the first input group that we have. And now let me remove the closing tag. We need to replace it and set it below the second input group. So just to make it sure, I will now highlight it. It should look for you exactly that way. Form opening tag, then we have the first input group inside there and the second input group right here. And then we have the form closing tag. Let's save. In our application, you can see that we now have some, well, issues going on. So let's open up our developer console. Control-Shift-J. Oh, you can see an error appearing here, right? In order to fix the issue, we have to set the name attribute for the inputs. You can see that here. If ngModel is used within a form tag, either the name attribute must be set or blah blah blah. So we can set the name attribute. So here in line 5, for the first input field, let's set the name. So name is equals to date. That's the first thing that we need to do. And in the second input field here for the text or for the new task title, right, we want to do the same. Name, this is the name attribute. We want to set it to task title. Awesome. Save. You can now see our application working again, and we don't have any compilation errors here or any errors in our development console. Now, we don't need that button to handle the add method right here. We can simplify this. Let's remove the click event. So right now, if I click on the add button, nothing will ever happen. But we can make that work again. And the only thing that we have to do for this is to go to the forms opening tag here, form opening tag. Let's use another event, which is called ngSubmit. Well, I guess you can tell that this event is getting called once you click on the button. So ngSubmit submits the form and calls, or actually starts the event, right? So what we want to do is on that ngSubmit event, we want to call the add method again. So we switched it over from the button to call it to let actually the form call it on ngSubmit here. Now for your interest, it's a little bit more in depth now, but when you bind the method to the ngSubmit instead of a buttons click, the event target refers to the form and not to the button. And the form for sure contains way more information about the form itself. We will focus on that template, references and variables later on, no worries. Now let's try to check if everything is working. Let's add a new task. So go to the mall. Let's hit add. You can see go to the mall, right? So it's submitted and reset the title for the to-do, but the date is still set. And if we want to clear that, so if we also want to clear the date, we can simply go ahead and clear the entire form. And just to remind you, the form are now this input field here and this input field. So both input fields are one form now because they are inside of one form tag. So to clear the form, you want to do that in a lot of real-world applications, really depending on your personal scenario. What we want to do is add a semicolon after the add method because we want to add some additional information here or additional comments. Write down task ngForm, task ngForm dot reset. Let's call it this way. Now also add a local reference, which is task ngForm equals to ngForm. So now we have an ID here. So that ID is related to that form, right? So this form here, and then we call task ngForm, which is then actually that form to be reset. Now let's switch over to our task list component. Now let me comment out this new task title here, just like that. And let's save it because we are resetting the form. We will remove that just in a second again because we don't want to clear the date, but I just want to show you that you can reset a form. So let's save it and take a look. You can see that once I go to the mall and I add it, please pay attention on that date here. Let me click on add. You can see everything is cleared out now, right? We don't have a date anymore and we don't have a title anymore. That's perfect. So we don't need that, right? So it doesn't make sense for our user experience, but I just wanted to show you that you can clear or reset entire forms because for you, it might be interesting to integrate that in your own applications later on. Okay, so let's get rid of this. So let's just reset the new task title again manually, go to the HTML, and let's completely remove the task ng form reset. We can keep the local reference set so that ID here, task ng form, we can keep it right now. You could also go ahead and submit the entire form as an object to the TypeScript component. So you could go to add and then just pass in here the task ng form, right? So now you would pass in the entire form and then you could also reset it. That would be a different way of doing that, for example. So we can also do it that way. Let's do it so that you know how you can actually use it later on. We will keep it then, that's totally fine. So let's just submit the task ng form here. Awesome, so now let's switch over to our task list component. We need to modify the add method right here. First of all, let me again scroll a little bit. Okay, and then we can again just remove this new task title because we will reset it in a different way. So in the add method, as a parameter, take the task ng form of type ng form. So this is our name and this for sure is the type. Now if you hover above this, you can find a quick fix. Let's just add import from add Angular forms, right? It just edits, right? That just adds our import ng form right here and we are able to use it. So that's just a quick way of doing that. Now let's call task ng form.reset. But as I said, we want to keep the date, right? So this would completely reset it, but we can for sure keep the date by using the actual input field, the name attribute that we just set. So here for the date, we set the name to date. So we can actually use date, set the value to this dot date, which is for sure our field right here, which is the date we have whatever selected. We also want to add one thing. We can find out if the user has ever interacted with that form, and there's a flag called touched. So what we can do is we can completely return from add. Like if I have never really entered a value, if I have never interacted with our form, then I should not take or make any action when I click on the add button, right? And we can do this by checking for if task ng form dot touched equals to false. So if the user never touched, well, let's call it interact. If the user never interacted with the form, we just want to return here. So this is something you really want to use quite often when you develop real-world applications, because you don't want the user to submit empty fields or empty forms, for example. There's also some other stuff like touched. Also we have valid and dirty. So those three are really common used. Okay, we will get to form validation and all of that later on. Let's take a look at our application now. Let me write down go to the mall, and it should now really clear out the title but keep the date. So let's hit add. Awesome, go to the mall. And now I have never touched the form, right? So now it's completely clear again. So when I click on plus, you can see nothing happens. So I can spam the add button, but nothing gets added because, well, our flag, which is actually touched, is not getting true, and so we directly return from that add method. ng form is a container for multiple form controls, and by binding ng models of inputs, Angular creates form control instance for the input to track its values, as well as its touched, dirtiness and validation statuses. ng form contains information about its form controls, and ng form knows whether the overall form is valid, whether it's touched, or whether it's dirty, and even more. It also enables you to navigate down to the controls or even modify them. You can reset the entire form by calling the simple reset method of the form. We just did that, right? And it helps you to have a cleaner code base.